Hello and welcome to Dremio. In this video, I am going to give you an introduction to the Dremio UI, and also I am going to help you get up and running with the product by running our first query. Dremio is a distributed system that runs on many nodes, but also it provides a UI with certain capabilities that we will walk through in this demo. Here we're running on AWS. Because Dremio is an elastic system, there is only one node that is running 24/7. It is important to note that the queries that we will be running run on many nodes in parallel. Here at the bottom left, you will see all the data sources. This is where you can connect to your S3 buckets. If you want to connect to any data source, just click on the plus sign, select the data source that you want to work with, provide connectivity information, save that information, and then you will be able to access that bucket right away. Here is the semantic layer. It consists of virtual data sets organized in spaces, which you can see here. You can browse into the spaces and folder inside of them to see all the virtual data sets that you have. These virtual data sets can be used to make data consumable and consistent for your business analyst and data scientist. Also, one of the amazing things that Dremio does that traditional SQL engines don't is interactive performance on S3. Okay, so check this out. Here I am going to go ahead and analyze a data set that contains taxi ridership for the city of New York. And I am going to go ahead and search for that data set as a first step. And then Dremio is going to give me a list of all the available data sets that we have that match that string. So what I have here is two different data sets. You will notice that we have the purple icons and also the green icons. The purple icons are the physical data sets that I am connected to. So in this case, I have a samples data set, which is a bucket that we have in Amazon S3, and it contains that information. And also you will see the green icons, which are the virtual data sets that we make available to the business users, data scientists, and data analysts in the semantic layer. So you can think of them as a view for the time being, but we refer to them as virtual data sets. So here you can see that this New York City trips is a data set that I have stored in the business space and in the transportation subspace. So I can either click here to preview that data, or we can go ahead and verify that it exists in there by going to that space and navigating to the transportation folder. So now I am going to go ahead and preview this data set. So here I can go ahead and preview the data and make sure that this is what I want to work with. I can go ahead and validate that the fields and the values they match. So I have, as I mentioned, this is a New York City taxi ridership data set. So it contains pickup dates and drop-off dates, and also a passenger count for each one of the rows in here. And each row is a taxi ride. I also can go ahead and take a look at the catalog and see details about this data set. I can take a look at the explanation of each one of the fields that I'm going to work with, as well as the volume of the data set that I'm working with. And in this case is 1 billion of rows that we have stored in our data lake, which in this case is S3. Now that we're done previewing the data and making sure this is exactly what we want to work with, I am going to go ahead and analyze this data set. So we're going to go ahead and use Tableau. You can use any BI tool that you want or any data science tool that you want. So I'm going to go ahead and select Tableau here. Then Dremio is going to download a very small TDS file, which will work as a pointer. It will allow me to create an ODBC connection between Dremio and Tableau. So as you can see here, all the fields that I have available in my dataset in Dremio, they have been made available to me in my BI tool. So the first thing that I want to do as an analyst, I want to see how many records do I have. And these correspond to the information that we had in our dataset. We have roughly 1 billion rows of taxi rides, and each one of these rows is going to be a taxi ride in this data set. So I also want to go ahead and see, for example, what is the time distribution for this data set. Say we want to analyze how rideshare apps are affecting taxi ridership. So in this case, I can see that this defaulted to total per year, but I want to go ahead and see these into quarters and see what is the distribution. And now I can see that also it defaulted to quarters every year, but I want to dig a little bit more into it and see what is the distribution of quarter of year over year. So what I have here is now a more granular level view of this data set. But what if I want to go ahead and actually dig a little deeper? So I want to go ahead and see what is the distribution of this week over week. So now we have a more granular analysis of this particular data set in 1 billion rows. So what is important to know is that each one of these clicks that I did here to drill down into this data set and create this graph is a live query that goes straight to Dremio. We are not making any copies of data whatsoever. We're analyzing directly 1 billion rows of data from my BI tool, and Dremio is still providing sub-seconds response. And then if we jump back to Dremio and we take a look at the jobs entry, we can see all the queries that we were launching from our ODBC client. In this case, it was Tableau. And you can see that each one of these queries, each one of the clicks that we were doing in Tableau to generate the graph that we just created was coming back to us in less than a second. So at the speed of thought. So you can go ahead and create any complex dashboard that you want, and your response time is always going to be sub-second. So what you can see here is the queries that were being generated by Dremio. And also you can see that this is being accelerated by a critical capability that we have in Dremio called data reflections. So if we go here, we can see here that this data reflection accelerated those queries, and we can go ahead and take a look at that, and we can see all the fields for this aggregation reflection. This means that we can get sub-second response on each one of the queries that contain any combination of these fields. So if I go ahead and launch another query that contains only some of the fields that are included in this aggregation reflection, Dremio is going to take care of those fields, accelerate that part of the query, and is going to go ahead and push down the rest of the query to the data source. So going back to our analysis, what if we wanted to go ahead and do an analysis of trips at trip distance? So I can go ahead and make this a more complex analysis and see how this is going to impact my analysis. So what I'm going to do here is I have now trip distance in miles, but I want to go ahead and actually make that an average. So I'm going to go ahead and change that aggregation, and I can go ahead and analyze that data. But what if I wanted to actually change this from miles to kilometers? So I could go ahead and change and share this data set with other parts of the world where distance is being measured using the metric system. So we can go back to Dremio and look up our data set, and then now we have here the trip distance. So I'm going to go ahead and make a quick transformation here. I am going to turn this distance into kilometers. So I'm going to go ahead and change this. The new field name is going to be trip distance km. We're going to leave the original field there. We don't want to drop it. I am going to go ahead and apply this change. And now we have the trip distance kilometer field here. So I'm going to go ahead and save these, and I'm going to save it on my, experimental space. So I'm going to call this trip distance km, and I am going to save that. Now we can go back to Tableau, and I can go ahead and update the data source. So I can go ahead and drop the one that I'm working with at the moment, and I can go ahead and search for the one that I just created and update the data set that I'm working with. And then I can go back to my analysis, and now we have the trip distance in kilometers here. So we can go ahead and drop this and add the trip distance in kilometers, and go ahead and select the same measure. We can go ahead and see an average, and now we have that calculation done in kilometers. So now if we go back to the jobs entry in Dremio, even though this is a new field that we just created, is a field that Dremio was able to accelerate, the reflection was still able to accelerate that query, even though it included a new field that was not part of that reflection. So you're able to still make new fields and make changes to your data set and continue using those immediately on your report. You don't have to go ahead and create a new data pipeline request to have that new data field included in your model. In a similar way, you could go back and make any other changes that you need to your data set, save those changes as a virtual data set, and in that way, all your users will always be working on a semantic layer at a logical level, so you don't have to worry about having to create an extract or a virtual cube or a different model depending on the tool or the analysis that they are trying to make. Therefore, this enhances collaboration and also allows you to use your resources more effectively. We hope that you're enjoying Dremio AWS Edition, and as always, please reach out to us if you have any questions.